the Bruins could use some shakeup here. Win of the season, part 4 or 5 on Saturday. Actually, an incredible game down in Florida against the Panthers, where they gave up, I think it was 110 shot attempts to Florida. That's incredible. It's the most they've given up since they tracked the stat that was starting in 2007. Shot attempts, not shots on goal, obviously, but still, it was insane. They were outshot attempted by like 60. They're winning most of the game. They're just hanging on. And then the drama comes, because this rivalry has drama, whether it's in the regular season or not. And it's too bad they're not going to be playing in the postseason very much, or it's not going to be very competitive, because the Bruins are nowhere near the Panthers right now. But there's an empty net for like a minute and a half. The Panthers are down 1. The Bruins cannot clear the zone. They finally get it out. Pastrnak shoots it from the red line, and it goes off the post. And icing. The Bruins can't win faceoffs. This is with 18 seconds left, and you know exactly what's going to happen after that. Exactly what's going to happen. And Florida scores the bonkerest goal I've ever seen. It hits off, well, maybe not ever, but it hits off Reinhart, and then I think a Bruin, and Osterley, the defenseman's reaching back to slap at it, completely whiffs, and it goes over Swayman's shoulder for a goal with a second and a half left. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. This is pure torture watching this team. It goes to overtime. The Bruins actually get a Sam Bennett penalty in overtime, which is awesome. And he's just whacks McAvoy in the face with his stick and is trying to argue it. And then it's just fumble their way into an overtime win, because with 2 seconds left, Pasternak's got it. He's passing with 2 seconds left, and it goes off a Panther stick, off Reinhardt's stick, actually, and deflects into the net. Like total puck luck, just like the game-tying goal, and the Bruins win it with like a second left in overtime. Awesome, awesome win. But that's what they needed to do to end a 6-game losing streak. And I still don't know that things are getting much better for this team this year or really beyond. And what I've talked myself into the past few days is Elias Pettersson. Yeah. I regret to inform my fans, I have absolutely talked myself into an Elias Pettersson trade for the Bruins. There have been rumors abound the past week of JT Miller and Elias Pettersson being on the trading block for Vancouver. And their apparent rift, obviously we know JT Miller took a break from hockey in earlier in the season, and there's been all kinds of reports of these guys cannot play together. Pettersson obviously being the face of the franchise, and JT Miller being a huge leader on that team and being, arguably their second or third best player on the team. And there's all kinds of troubles there. We talk about the Bruins, setting the wins record 2 years ago. And how far they've fallen. I believe Vancouver was the number 1 seed in the West that year. And if not, they were up until the end of the season. Like they were going pace for the Bruins for a while that season. They were very good. And here we are talking about them, potentially not making the playoffs and having to break up their core. I am all in on an Elias Pettersson trade. I've really talked myself into it for the Bruins. And it is kind of counterintuitive to what I've talked about with their needs and what the long-term plan is for this team. I've talked about it for a while here, but let's just lay this part out, okay? You probably shouldn't make the playoffs this year. You haven't deserved to make the playoffs so far, and if you do, you will have just fumbled your way in like that game-winning goal in Florida, and you're going to get embarrassed in the postseason, okay? You have the worst prospect pool in the league. You were the only team that did not have a prospect at the World Junior Championships this year. So that's bad writing on the wall. And I've said it earlier this year too. The Bruins could probably do with like a big time transformational trade the way, we talked about in 05-06. They traded Joe Thornton and Sergei Samsonov in the same year. And that led to them having the flexibility to build a Stanley Cup winning team and kind of that next generation of the Bruins, right? Because after that year, they go out and they get Mark Savard, and then they go out and get Zdeno Chara, and the rest is history. Like the franchise completely changes. They get some draft picks out of it that become, Marco Sturm and eventually Milan Lucic and Brad Marchand, and you make the deal for Ray Croft to that same year to get rid of him and get Tuukka Rask in return. So that opens up a lot for them. It's not, you look at the Joe Thornton trade and it's like, woof, Wayne Primo and Marco Sturm. And it's like, what does that ever become? But it allowed the organization so much more flexibility to build that team. And so I think the Bruins could do with something like that. And here you would get something like the Thornton deal, but with actually bringing some skill in return. If you go out and trade for Elias Pettersson, because here's a guy who is entering in his prime. He's 26 years old. Okay. He's already had a 100-point season. He already has looked like a top 5 potentially, but definitely a top 10 player in the NHL. He's not on a good stretch right now. He's battling a knee injury that he's been battling for like almost a year now, that I'm sure doesn't help, that he hasn't complained about. And his postseason numbers have not been terrific, which sounds a lot like what we were saying about Joe Thornton when the Bruins traded him to San Jose. And while the Bruins got the build, San Jose got a Hall of Fame player. And this might be the craziest thing I've ever said on the show, but if you trade for Elias Pettersson, you could be getting both. Could be getting both those things. You could have some flexibility, even though Pettersson's going to cost a lot of money. That's a big contract that you're getting. And while he would cost a lot of money, you would allow for some shakeup in this organization and allow yourself to build around a guy that's just entering his prime, the same way you did with Zdeno Chara coming in at a similar age. So I'm all in on it. The problem is, of course, I don't think the Bruins can match what the Canucks are going to ask for Elias Pettersson. I just don't think they can. Everything's got to be a salary match pretty much. So that's a problem because Elias Pettersson has a big time salary. He's getting paid, I think, over $11 million a year, the same as Pastrnak. And in a vacuum, I would say I'm okay with trading one of your kind of 4 foundational pieces if it means someone like Elias Pettersson. Those pieces being Marchand, Pastrnak, McAvoy, Swayman. That said, let's go through that. If you trade McAvoy, he has a no-trade clause, and he's never played outside of he played at BU and then played for the Bruins. So I don't know that he just exactly wants to move to a different coast and into a different country and play for Vancouver. I don't know if that interest is there, which is a big part of this. And the other thing is, he is your franchise defenseman, which is important because Hampus Lindholm would be kind of that next guy in the defense core, and you don't know like his health status going forward. He's coming off that kneecap injury, which sounds really painful. And the other guy you would have is Brandon Carlo, who is up next year. So he's trade bait anyway. So probably not a great position to move Charlie McAvoy. David Pastrnak. In a vacuum, okay, but what's the point of getting Elias Pettersson if you don't have him playing with David Pastrnak? What's the point of having one of the great playmakers in the league if he's not making plays for anybody? Now, you look at the lines that Pettersson has played on before. In his 100-point season, he had a couple of nobodies playing on that line with him. So he can make something happen, but what's the point if you don't have a guy like Pastrnak there? Jeremy Swayman, again, don't mind throwing him in for a trade for a foundational piece like Pettersson would be. But then in fact, I would think the most likely and the one that Bruins fans would be most okay with would probably be Swayman. But the problem then would come from the GM's office of, hey, I can't trade both of our goalies in the same year. Can't do that. So that becomes a bit of a Don Sweeney issue. And the fourth one would be Brad Marchand. Don't think Brad Marchand's ever playing for Vancouver. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Now, then again, Vancouver did at one point go out and get Mark Messier, who had broken their hearts in the Stanley Cup final before. But I just don't see a world where Brad Marchand is being traded to the Vancouver Canucks. So there we go. Your 4 trade pieces. I don't think any of those work. And so therefore you've got to go with, as much as you can in terms of the prospects pool, which the only players anyone would care about is Patra and Lohrei, and probably a first round pick. And then you got to do some salary matching. So that does end up being someone like Zacha or Carlo or Coyle or Frederick, and any of those guys, I'm okay. I'm okay with going away from. And in fact, I would probably be okay with that other part of the deal, the Lohrei, Patra, and a first round pick. Because look, Patra is someone we like and think is going to be a contributor for this team. But we're talking about Elias Pettersson's a point a game guy. I don't think Patra is going to be a point a game guy, like ever, right? So you get rid of him. He's, 19 or 20. And here you get a guy who is still pretty young in Pettersson, who is entering into his prime and has already been a 100-point guy. So I'm okay with dealing someone like Patra and or Lohrei. Lohrei is a guy I really like who's struggled recently the last month, but I'm okay with that. And even this year's first round pick, which you finally have, it's not the end of the world mainly because I think you're going to have a better first round pick next year. But maybe if you're getting Pettersson, you say, all right, we'll tank out this year and it's not going to be a real tank. They're probably going to make the playoffs with a guy like Pettersson. And we'll worry about next year's pick being just mid. But one more thing I want to get into with Pettersson, because I want to bring Joe Thornton back into this. There are a lot of people talking about how that trade could be used to Vancouver's benefit here. And I absolutely see it. Like Pettersson, the playmaking center, big guy, ton of skill, great skater, kind of the cornerstone of your franchise. And he doesn't, he's not getting along well with his teammates right now. He doesn't perform well in the postseason. He's on a bit of a stretch, probably playing through something he shouldn't be playing through. That, to me, is Joe Thornton. And you look at the guys and their comparisons throughout their careers, and there's a lot of Joe Thornton. Now, Elias Pettersson won the Calder, and Thornton had 7 points in 55 games his rookie year. But you talk about Pettersson hitting 100 points. That was in his 5th NHL season, and it took Joe Thornton to his 6th NHL season to reach 100 points. They were both the same age. They traded Thornton when he was 26. Elias Pettersson is 26. He made a couple of all-star teams, 3 straight all-star teams before he was traded. Elias Pettersson, 3-time all-star. Like, it all matches up very well. And San Jose did not win the cup with Thornton, but they built around him pretty quickly and were annually a playoff team, like all the time. And they did get to a final with him. So as much as we want to bash the Joe Thornton thing, I think you can get a little bit of the best of both worlds. You can get the Joe Thornton type player and the future that the Bruins got without Joe Thornton, the organizational flexibility that they got without him. I think this is a reach. I think there are some other teams that are way in on these guys, both Pettersson and Miller. I do want to talk about JT Miller on tomorrow's show because I think that's going to end up being more likely and maybe more beneficial to the Bruins just because of what you have to give up. But if you're the Bruins and you've got to give up a first-round pick and Matt Patra and Mason Lohrei, and what you get in return is the franchise center that you've been chasing, and one that produces even more than Bergeron and Krejci were at the end of their careers. Like, that is exactly what you need. You need a guy like that playing with David Pastrnak. And Pettersson is on a bit of a dry spell it's actually been a while. It's been really since like March of last year. Probably battling an injury. Maybe it's the big contract. Maybe then he just needs a change of scenery. But we've already seen Pettersson go through a slump like this with a big contract that he signed back in, I want to say it was 2020. And he came out of it. He had a 100-point season a couple years later. And then you put him on a line with Pastrnak. That unleashes Pastrnak back into that 60-goal scorer and Pettersson to the 100-point guy. Like, you went out, you got the wrong center this year in Elias Lindholm, who's a number 2 or number 3 center. Here is the bona fide number 1 center stud guy. He's right there. So if I'm the Bruins, I'm not worried about taking that kind of reach and making that kind of trade. In fact, I would do that in a second if I were the Bruins. I don't think they're going to be able to pony up enough for Vancouver to really whet Vancouver's appetite here. But it sounds like both those guys are on the block, Pettersson and Miller. I think that would be very surprising for Vancouver. I think JT Miller could be a number 1 center as well, by the way. He's obviously a little bit older. I think he's 6 years older than Pettersson. But if you're Vancouver, you can say, all right, if we get Patra in this deal and Lowry in this deal, we can keep JT Miller, have him be our number 1 center, and Patra can fill in as a number 2 or 3 center, which is what we were chasing last year with getting Elias Lindholm. I think there's a way to work this out. And if I'm Don Sweeney and I'm, trading for my job here, I think this is actually not a panic move. I think this would be great for the future of the Bruins. And it would allow you to subtly rebuild. Because if you add Pettersson to this team here, they are in a much better shape. Much better shape. You've got to fix the farm system anyway. Why not bring in a guy that's going into his prime? At least that's what I think.
We are Rogue Media Sports.
Hey, thanks for stopping by. And if you like this video, be sure to give us a like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a ton. You can follow me on Twitter here for some more outrageous Boston sports takes coming to you every weekday at noon Eastern time. And then after that, wherever you get your podcasts.
We are Rogue Media Sports.